Have you ever looked at your shadow? Really looked? It's always there, clinging to your heels, mimicking your every move. But what if it stopped mimicking? What if it had a mind of its own? The streetlights flickered on, casting long, distorted shadows across the sidewalk. Michael, weary from a long day, trudged home, his briefcase heavy in his hand. The air held a chill, biting at his skin. Dusk was falling, painting the sky in hues of purple and gray. He quickened his pace. The unsettling emptiness of the street amplified the echoes of his footsteps. Each clang of his footfalls seemed to be answered by an offbeat whisper, just out of sync with his own rhythm. A shiver ran down Michael's spine. He stopped, holding his breath, listening for the sound again. Silence. He chuckled nervously, blaming his exhaustion for the imagined echo. As he started walking again, he couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. He glanced down at his shadow. It stretched out before him, elongated and grotesque in the flickering streetlight. And then, for a fleeting moment, he could have sworn it twitched, a movement independent of his own. His heart pounded in his chest. He picked up his pace, his eyes darting around, searching for the source of his unease. A narrow alleyway gaped between two buildings, shrouded in darkness. He could have sworn he saw a figure disappear into the shadows just as he passed. A scream pierced the night. Michael spun around, adrenaline surging through him. He saw the figure stumble back into the streetlight, silhouetted against the darkness of the alley. A woman, her face contorted in terror, her hand clutching a bleeding gash on her arm. But there was no one else there. The assailant, if there ever was one, had vanished. Michael rushed to the woman's aid, his mind reeling from what he had or hadn't seen. He helped her to her feet, his heart still pounding. Her eyes were wide with fear, her voice trembling as she spoke. "It came from the shadows," she whispered, pointing a shaky finger at the alley. "It attacked me! From the shadows!" Michael's blood ran cold. He looked back at the alley. The shadows seemed deeper now, more solid, as if they held their breath, waiting. The woman's words echoed in his ears, confirming his growing terror. His shadow, his own shadow, was somehow responsible. He tried to rationalize it, to find a logical explanation, but deep inside, he knew. The shadows weren't just shadows anymore. They were alive, and they were hungry. He left the terrified woman with the paramedics, his mind a storm of confusion and dread. He had to get home, to the supposed safety of his apartment. He walked faster now, almost running, his heart pounding a frantic rhythm against his ribs. He risked a glance down at his side. His shadow was no longer a flat, obedient mimic. It writhed and twisted with a sickening life of its own, growing larger with every flickering streetlight he passed. It reached out, stretching across the sidewalk, long, grasping fingers of darkness reaching for him. He stumbled back, tripping over his own feet. Panic flooded him, cold and suffocating. He was no longer in control. His shadow loomed over him, a grotesque, distorted figure with a gaping maw filled with jagged teeth. It blocked the streetlight, plunging him into an abyss of absolute darkness. He could feel its cold, oily presence enveloping him, pulling him down into the shadows. A scream died in his throat. Then, silence. The street was empty. The only sound was the distant wail of a siren fading into the night. The shadows had retreated, seeping back into the cracks and crevices of the city, waiting for the next unsuspecting soul. The shadows remember, they always remember, and they are always hungry.